So tonight, we head back to Belize and visit the museum and the culture behind the area. My co-host, Matt Hochberg from Royal Caribbean Blog, is going to be tackling the benefits and the risks of booking a cruise to sail during hurricane season. We look at President Trump's new Cuba ruling and how that will affect cruises to Cuba, and what you can do if your cruise is canceled or diverted. Our photo of the week this week also comes from the RC Periscopers group, and we'll be able to tell you about how to vote for us in the upcoming streaming awards show that we've been nominated for. So, all this and more, so stay tuned because this is Cruise Week TV Live. What's going on, cruisers? I'm Joe, and together with my co-host Matt, we tackle all sorts of cruise-related topics. Matt is an experienced cruiser. He runs the Royal Caribbean blog, and I myself am not as experienced as Matt is, but together we bring on experts and dive into topics to save you guys money, time, and trouble to make your cruise the best ever, no matter what cruise line that you might be sailing on. And nowadays, with more and more people looking to take their first cruise, the options of what to pick and choose can be overwhelming. What to do and what not to do on the ship can be confusing, but fun at the same time. Today's ships are practically floating cities. Royal Caribbean's Oasis-class ships have things like bumper cars, ice skating rinks, Broadway shows on board, and with so many options, we're here to help answer your questions and also talk to our expert guests about everything from ports to ships to things like insurance and deals. So, before we dive into our first guest, I want to thank our sponsor of the show, Good Memories Travel. And you really need to check out goodmemoriestravel.com to save you guys some money on your next cruise. You get the same great rates as you would booking yourself, plus you may get an onboard credit or a customer reward. Yes, they actually give you money to cruise with. They enjoy planning and helping you with weddings, honeymoons. They are fully licensed by the CLIA, which stands for Cruise Lines International Association, and they've also been earmarked by Disney. Good Memories Travel also specializes in handling every aspect of your group cruise, family getaway, or that family reunion that you've always been wanting to plan. Imagine letting someone else do all the work while you get to relax. Debbie can work directly with the cruise line to organize onboard parties, events, and the wedding service, which is one less thing that you have to worry about. Debbie can also take card points. So let's say if you have an American Express rewards card, you can use the points to pay for your next cruise. Good Memories Travel also plans various Christian-related group cruises. Their God is Good group cruise is coming up, so be sure to check that out on their website. They handle, of course, cruises for all cruise lines like Carnival, Royal, MSC, Norwegian, and more all over the world. Debbie Smith is part of Cruise Planners, so give her a call to see what they can do for you. It doesn't cost you a thing to look them up and get your best rate. Now, next week, we have something super exciting to announce in partnership with Good Memories Travel, and I know you'll all just love it. So be sure to check in with Debbie and get your best cruise quote this week, and then watch the show next week to find out what it is. Call Debbie for a no-obligation quote on your next cruise. What have you got to lose? Debbie can be reached at 321-338-2953, and of course, through their website at goodmemoriestravel.com. And let them know that you heard about them right here on cruiseweek.tv. So, President Donald Trump slammed former President Barack Obama's dealings with the communist regime in Cuba on Friday in Miami, charting his own course of more confrontational relations with the Castro-led government. President Trump said in a statement, and I quote, "I am canceling the last administration's completely one-sided deal with Cuba," unquote. So, how does this affect sailings to Cuba? Well, we reached out to both Royal Caribbean and Carnival and talked to them yesterday. Both said that as of now, they will continue sailing and tours as usual, and as long as the guests have been touring under the 12 approved forms of travel and tours, things should not be affected. So, Matt, what do you think may happen in the future?
Well, my crystal ball is a little cloudy on this, but the good news is, at least as it pertains to cruising, is we're not going to see a whole lot of impact. In fact, Royal Caribbean said that there is no impact on its cruises and as well as its shore excursions. So from a purely cruising standpoint, I can tell you that it looks reasonably good in the sense that there's no canceled cruises and there does not appear to be any impact on perhaps other upcoming sailings either this year or next year. So everyone's sailings are safe.
Well, that's definitely good for now because honestly, like I haven't even been to Cuba myself yet, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it. I've had so many people that have been going to Cuba. Of course, I've had a couple on the show in the time that we've been doing the show, bringing us videos and sending us pictures from Cuba, and even some friends of mine who happen to be travel agents have been sending me pictures, and it looks like it's a whole different world there. It looks like it's almost a world like out of the 1950s or 60s with all the old cars, old buildings. It's definitely something that I'd like to see. So I'd hate to see any kind of travel ban put on that to cease, travels to Cuba.
Yeah, I think a lot of people agree with you, Joe, myself included, because of course there's so much potential there, right? I mean, it's a little bit of the forbidden fruit for Americans, so we haven't been able to go there for such a long time. But also, a large part of that has to do with what you said earlier, which is that it is like almost a different kind of world. There's something enticing about it, and one of the detractions about taking a cruise in the Caribbean is that a lot of the ports tend to blend in together, right? They start to seem very, very similar to each other. And Cuba, which still has beautiful beaches and everything, is a little different from that for that regard. And I think that there's a lot of people who will tell you if they've taken cruises already. I've spoken to a number of folks. My parents took a cruise. I got friends who were on an Empress of the Seas cruise not too long ago, and they also say the same thing, which is it's an amazing experience. They really want to go back there, and it's something that I think is very intriguing. So I'm with you, man. I think that this is a fantastic opportunity to go visit there finally, and I'm personally glad that it looks like cruise lines will still be able to travel to Cuba, at least in the foreseeable future.
Well, same here. Matt, I want to bring up something that you mentioned. I'm glad you touched on this. Now, you say that after a while, cruise ports seem to blend together. And this is something that we haven't seen of Cuba yet. And I feel like it's been that way because it's been untouched by cruise ships for so long. Like like people haven't been able to travel there. Do you think that maybe like within the next, and maybe not in the next like 6 months, but in the next maybe 5 years or 7 years down the road, it might start to blend with all of the other cruise ports in the sense that they're going to might maybe cater towards tourists like some of the other ports in the Caribbean do.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that a lot of what you're talking about is obviously looking forward. There's no question that Cuba's infrastructure needs significant upgrades. I mean, right now, the smallest cruise ships can make it in there. That's why Empress of the Seas was brought back. And if you look at any of the cruise lines out there, you're going to find the same basic scenario: very small, older ships that are going there. And the primary reason is because Havana Harbor can't accommodate anything. In the last 10 to 20 years, you've seen ports all over the Caribbean expanding their facilities to accommodate these growing and growing ships. That's where the money is. So my hope and what I think is really going to happen is that as Cuba starts to get more money in here from this, they're going to have that opportunity down the line to make that happen. Now, of course, still there's some U.S. restrictions and embargoes that are still in place here, which is going to prohibit companies like Royal Caribbean or Carnival or any of the others out there partnering with the government in the same way they've done in Jamaica, in Honduras, and other ports all around the Caribbean to do this kind of like, hey, let's buddy up and build a bigger and larger port. Like Falmouth, Jamaica is a classic example of that. Royal Caribbean partnered with the Port Authority there in Falmouth. It was a port that didn't really serve cruises at all, and now it's a preeminent destination in Jamaica for cruise ships because it's a brand new facility. They built a huge area around it, but that takes time and money. And to your point, is it going to happen in the next 6 months? No. Is it going to happen in the next 5 years? Maybe. Well, things can change. I mean, certainly I don't think 2 years ago we would have expected what we see now to have happened. So lots can change, but I think that, yeah, you're still looking at a very much a long-term play here in terms of getting Havana and other ports within Cuba to be up to, I don't want to say necessarily the standards that we see else in the Caribbean, but certainly be able to accommodate larger ships, which may play into what you were kind of hinting at, which is maybe you have that more of the same. But I think Cuba and all the islands have something, little aspects of it that endear themselves to make them a little more unique. And I think that that's going to all play together to make Cuba a really great destination for many years to come.
Marvelous. All right. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your insight on that. I was curious to see what you might say, so I'm glad that that you gave your insight on that. And honestly, like whether and what I pick up from it is we still need to as travelers, as cruisers, make our way to Cuba within the next, within the foreseeable future if we can. Whether there would be a travel ban or not, because it just might not be the same in the next 5 years. So
Yeah,
appreciate
I
that.
mean, obviously, as more ports get any port, this is true of anywhere in the world. Any port that gets more tourists in there, obviously, you get more of the touristy stuff. Right now, it's not that touristy. Of course, Europeans and Canadians and basically everybody except for Americans have been going to Cuba still for the last couple decades. But for Americans, though, that seems to be that's like that wave that really gets the all the bars and touristy places out. There's nothing wrong with touristy places. Like I look at Margaritaville as much as the next guy. But I think what's kind of endearing about Cuba is that you go there and there's none of that stuff, right? I mean, imagine going to Nassau or Cozumel and there not being, any of those kind of places where it's nothing but, hot, 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 and those big drinks that are like this, the yard drinks and all those things, which are fun. Don't get me wrong, but it's not the real Cuba. It's not the real Cozumel. It's not the real Nassau. And in Cuba, when you go there now, to your point, if you go there in the next 12 months at least, you're definitely getting the real deal. You're getting an authentic experience, which is kind of a cool thing to be able to say and do in 2017.
Marvelous. And thank you, Matt. So we've been doing this show now for just 32 weeks. And before that, we did our first cruise as newbies, learning what it's like to cruise for the very first time. There's a video of that experience on cruiseweek.tv website, by the way. And now we've been nominated for the 2017 Live Streaming Awards. Guys, if you like our show, you can go to thestreamingawards.com/vote and cast your vote for us. And apart from the prestige of winning, we would also get some amazing camera gear to make the show even better. Thank you guys so much for your support over the past 32 weeks and getting us where we are now. By the way, voting for just so you guys know is open until I think June 30th. Yes, June 30th. Voting is going to be open until June 30th. So right now we are in first place by a good I want to say it looks like about 400 votes on the leaderboard. But that could change. As you can see, our second place is a sports network. Sports networks have a lot of viewers, so if you guys like our show and want us to beat out the sports network, be sure to go and vote for us on that website, so we can win our prestigious award and our camera gear, so we can make a better show for you. And now I want to welcome our guest today, live from the Belize Museum, Alexis Salazar. Last week we looked at Belize City, the tours, safety there, and today we want to look at its rich history. So welcome to the show, Alexis. Thank you so much for joining us live from Belize.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me, and welcome from all the way from Belize.
Well, I greatly appreciate that. And I've never been to Belize myself, but I've read some very interesting things about Belize's history. First off, Belize has a very, from what I've read, a very interesting history of pirate tales. So what can you tell me about that? Well, what can you tell me about how Belize started out as a country?
Okay, let's just take one step back just to answer your question. If you look geographically where we are in Central America, but obviously I'm speaking English. The rest of Central America speaks Spanish. So due to our history, we tend to reflect more of a Caribbean vibe or have the vibe of a Caribbean country. So I like to say that, or if I were to personify Belize would be kind of like a 13-year-old child with an identity crisis, because it doesn't quite fit into Central America and we don't quite fit into the Caribbean. And a part of that has to do with, you're right, we do have a history of piracy in Belize. When the British government decided to outlaw piracy, all these pirates who are in the Caribbean then had no source of income. So what they started doing was they started extracting logwood all across the coast of Central America. And eventually, these logwood extractors developed a settlement at the mouth of the Belize River, which is now Belize City. And they started extracting logwood for its dyes. It produces a red dye still. And then eventually, the economics of this the settlement of Belize started to extract mahogany. And so we developed into a British colony, and now a former British colony, because of logwood extraction from people who were former pirates and buccaneers and so on. So that is a little bit of the history of Belize and why Belize is an English-speaking country in Central America.
So now I didn't even know Belize was like an English speaking country, but you put it a very interesting way. A 13-year-old girl with an identity crisis, and that's
We
that was a
don't
very
know.
good
We
way.
don't know. We don't quite fit into Central America because there's obviously a language barrier in that all the other countries speak Spanish as their first language, and we speak English as our first language. And then when we go into the Caribbean, we're not an island and we're not in the West Indies, so they kind of have a hard time placing us as a part of the Caribbean also. So that's where the identity crisis comes in. So we're a mixture of both. No.
So now you guys being part of let's talk about the Central America part. Now you being in Central
Okay.
America, you guys have a little bit of a Mayan history as well, yes?
Yes. Belize is unique in that during that time, the Mundo Maya, we are part of the Mundo Maya, and we are one of the countries that was completely inhabited by by the Mayas. So, for example, Mexico would only be southern Mexico. Guatemala was completely inhabited, but mainly in the southern part. Um, Honduras is partially inhabited, as well as El Salvador. Now, Belize was fully inhabited, and at the peak of the Mayan civilization in Belize, the estimates of the Mayan population in Belize were at around 2 million people. Today's population is only 380,000 people. So you can see that we have a long history of Mayan occupation in Belize, and pretty much anywhere except for a few regions in the Savannah area of Belize, you would find remnants of these settlements. So we do have archaeological sites that are open to the community or to tourists or whoever wants to come and visit Belize, but there are hundreds of other sites that they're logged, but they're not open to the public, and they're not really for at this point for public use. We just catalog them through the Institute of Archaeology, but anywhere you go in Belize, there's probably an archaeological site near you.
Awesome. Now, about more about the history and more about your museum. How many people
Okay.
did you get, like on average, do you think that come from the cruise ships to come to see your museum and actually learn about the rich history of Belize?
We get quite a number of people that come to the museum per se. We do have two companies that sell a package directly from the cruise ship to come to the Museum of Belize. And I would estimate that last year we had around 20,000 visitors coming to our museum. And that may seem like not a large number, but when you look at the size of our museum at around 2,000 square feet, that is a lot of cruise ship visitors coming to this one museum. So they come off mainly off of these packages and then come to the museum. But we do have cruise ship passengers that come from the tourist village, which is about a 7-minute walk away, and make their way to the museum. They kind of trickle in, and they don't really, I don't know if they don't do the research as to where the museum is or what there is to do in Belize City. But when they get here, they're surprised that there is a museum. So I guess actually on our end as the museum, we do have to work on marketing ourselves at the tourist village so that we can get more people here.
Well, definitely. Like, if I've not been to Belize yet, that's one port that I haven't gotten a chance to hit in my 7 cruises that I've done. I have not been fortunate enough to make it there yet. I will at some point, I'm sure. And when I do, I definitely want to come see you. Well, come see the museum because aside from food, history is another thing that I'm big on when I travel. Travel to a lot of places, and it's because I feel like I should know a little bit about the place that that I'm visiting. So yeah, that's really awesome. All that I've like heard about Belize in the past has been like most of it's been about scuba diving and the barrier reefs, and
Okay.
that stuff has been fascinating as well. But a touch on some of the other history is very I find it fascinating.
Mhm.
So but now, aside from the museum, though, what's do you get to do anything out in the country aside from like running the museum and
Yes, I get to go around a lot. Just before I answer a question, what makes Belize competitive as a port destination? If you look at where the other stops are within the Caribbean and within Honduras and Mexico, is that we are a small country and we're easily accessible. So if you want to do snorkeling, you can do snorkeling in one day. You can do cave tubing in one day. You can do an archaeological site in one day. So there's more than one a thing that you can do for your trip. Whereas at other port cities, like let's say if you stop off in Quintana Roo in Mexico, you can't go to Chichen Itza because it's too far. You can only do the sea. You see, it's the same thing with Honduras. You cannot go to Copan because it's too far. Whereas Belize has more things to offer because of its small size and just the how easily accessible these tours are from off of the cruise ships. You can do an archaeological site in one day. You can do snorkeling in a half day and come to the museum the other half of the day. Now, going to your question, asking what I do outside of the museum. The museum is not only the museum, it is the Museum of Belize and Houses of Culture. And that is where our expansion of what Belizean culture is done throughout Belize. So we do everything from full moon concerts to archaeological displays to having small museums at these houses of culture. We work with festivals and so on in these districts. So there's a lot of things. I'm not in my office a lot. I'm outside at these houses of culture, and of course, we are a part of the National Institute of Culture and History. So I go to archaeological sites often, and I go to festival openings often because we do have sister departments that deal with these things.
so what kind of things can you actually like if I was to visit the museum, what are some things that I might see inside the Museum of Belize?
Okay, I think to answer that, we have to start with the history of the actual building. This building was used as a prison from 1857 to, I believe, 1996. I may
Sorry,
be wrong,
the
maybe
actual museum was
1992.
used as a prison?
Yes, this was known as Her Majesty's Prison. So this was a prison that had,
Whoa!
yeah, we had actual executions in this building. There are 18 documented that we know. Okay, so it's an old building. It's from 1857. It was built after 1855 fire in Belize Tongue destroyed the first prison, and then they moved it over to this side of Belize City. So the building itself is a prison. Now, if you come here, we still have one of the cells intact, so you can see what an actual prisoner would have gone through or what they would have felt living inside a prison. No, but as far as displays, we do have one that is known as Enslaved, which is our newest exhibit that deals with the history of slavery in Belize and how that translates itself into our culture today. So we do have that, which is not a permanent exhibit, so it's changed on a yearly to 1 year to 2 year basis. We have other collections. We have the jade collection that deals with Mayan jewelry and the trade of jade, because Belize doesn't have jade. So all jade that were found at our archaeological sites came from outside of Belize, and it emphasizes how great the civilization were, and it shows you the vast level of trade that they were having. They were trading all the way with Mexico City, and this was a stone tool civilization. So all jades that you'll see upstairs in our room was not sourced from Belize. They were found in Belize, but they were imported. Other things that we have on display permanently is our bug room, which is it's an insect collection of various insects that you will find in Belize. We have Mayan pottery, and you'll be able to differentiate between early classic, late classic, pre-classic, and so on, based on the shade of the pots that we have. And then lastly, we do have a stamp collection, but we recently took it down to do some to work on it to make it a little bit better and more attractive. So right now we have a photographic display in the museum. So a small museum, lots of things to do. It'll take about 2 hours to complete. No.
Wow. Definitely. Like if I ever come to Belize, when I come to Belize, I'm going to say I definitely want to visit the museum because I'm definitely a history person. I like seeing the history of wherever I'm visiting.
Mm-hmm.
So now tell us, like before we wrap up the interview, tell me where is it that our viewers will be able to go to find out more if they're interested in coming to visit the Museum of Belize?
Well, they can go to our website, which is nichebelize.org. Niche is, again, for National Institute of Culture and History, /museum, and the Museum of Belize. And then there's a direct, if you want to contact us and email us and tell us when you'll be coming and what the prices are and what all we offer, we tend to answer our emails within 1 day of you sending us an email. You can also check us out on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/mob/NICH. So those are 2 ways that you can keep up with the Museum of Belize.
Excellent. Alexis, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I greatly appreciate having you, and I greatly appreciate all the knowledge that you've given us tonight. So thank you. Look forward to seeing you at the museum.
Yep. Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me on the show. And to everybody watching, come to Belize.
All right. Thanks, Alexis. Now, viewers, this show and all the wonderful abilities that we have to bring in guests remotely wouldn't be possible at the level we do without vMix. vMix is a live production software that powers our live show and many other high-end productions, from church services to football games. More and more productions are running on vMix. And what our producer Bird really liked when he was trying to improve our show was that they give you a full 60-day trial of everything. That way you can test it out risk-free before you buy for a full 2 months. Then they have systems starting from just $350. So if you're going to do any sort of serious live streaming, you need vMix. Try it at vmix.com today. So if you live in Florida like myself and Matt, you're used to hurricanes, especially after 2004. But what if you're on a cruise ship in the middle of the ocean or have a cruise booked during hurricane season? Matt, is it wise to book a cruise to the Caribbean during this time of year?
Absolutely. The answer is yes. There's obviously some considerations involved, but I know for a lot of people, you're saying, wait a minute, whoa. You want me to go where and what could happen? That's crazy talk. I'm going to the North Pole instead. That's just the most logical thing to do. And of course, that would be silly and you shouldn't do that. No, I mean, cruising during hurricane season is something that has its own risk. I mean, there's risk no matter what time of year you go. And I really thought this would be fun to talk about today, Joe, because I feel like a lot of people that are new to cruising, they hear the word hurricane and it's like a huge red flag. Like, I'm not going there. I'd sooner go to the North Pole, somewhere else that is just, it seems like less dangerous than hurricane. And the reality is it's not like that at all. I mean, the cruise lines, look, they're a for-profit place, right? I mean, their number one job is to make money, and they're not going to make money if their ships are in the path of a storm. So I think there's some things that I wanted to talk to you about. But to answer your question on a very simple level, absolutely take a cruise during hurricane season, because it's silly to avoid it purely for that reason. There's many things that we're going to talk about here today, I think, that'll help kind of reassure and explain why cruising during hurricane season is not a mistake.
Well, Matt, when I think of cruising during hurricane season, I got to tell you, the first thing that comes to my mind, and any of you viewers can look this up on YouTube, just go to YouTube and type in don't do it right now, you're watching the show, but you can go to YouTube and type in the search bar, cruise during a storm, and then it'll actually show you footage of the security cameras. Now, the security cameras are stationary, but as the ship rocks from side to side, you can see all of the furniture and all of the objects in the room shift from one side of the ship back to the other side of the ship and back again. And you can see that one guy that's hanging on for dear life onto a pole in the middle of the room. And I think that's what people think of when they think about cruising during hurricane season, is watching the video of, and like the one behind me, much like the one behind me, if the ship rocking back and forth, of the guy holding on to the pole, trying not to go from side to side. So I think that's just a scary image that people get in their head.
Yes, but it's a common first thought, especially if you're new to cruising, you're not aware of what hurricane season is all about. Yes, that's a common thought, but first and foremost, storms can happen throughout the year. Doesn't matter when. In fact, I'll point out that if you remember last year, I think it was last year, with Anthem of the Seas, they ran into a major storm, except that was in February. So storms can happen no matter what. There's very little things that we as people have control over, and that one of them, weather, is definitely not one of them. I don't know that that's a characteristic or something you can reasonably expect to happen. It's not a common thing. Like you said, you can always find things like that. You can find videos of airplanes crashing all the time. I can find tons of that. Doesn't mean that your airplane is going to crash. In fact, statistically, it's very unlikely to happen. Same is true for cruising. I mean, these ships go and they avoid these storms. First and foremost, when there's a named storm, when they're there, the good news is they're fairly large, so it's pretty easy to spot them. And while their exact path may vary, generally speaking, the cruise lines know to just to avoid that entire region. So Eastern Caribbean cruises may become a Western Caribbean cruise or vice versa. Basically, the bottom line is if there is a storm, these ships will go in essentially the opposite direction to avoid them. It's just not good business practice to send the ships anywhere near them, even though, if it makes you feel any better, these ships can't handle, hurricane category 2, category 3 hurricanes easily. It may not be fun, but they will survive. In fact, on that Anthem of the Seas cruise I mentioned earlier, they encountered really strong winds. It was a winter storm in the Atlantic, and what was interesting was actually the internet never even went out, let alone had any issues with some of the with any kind of injuries or anything like that. So that's great news. At least it makes me feel better about it. But the bottom line is, when you're talking about these storms in hurricane season, just because there's storms in the air or potentially storms in the air doesn't mean it's going to impact you. And also, there's only however many storms that are out there in any given year. Most storms end up going nowhere. They form off the coast of Africa, and they usually curve up in the middle of the Atlantic and go nowhere. Very few of the storms actually are a threat to the U.S. mainland, and many dissipate before they ever become anything. It's not always the case, but it's not like there's a storm every week. Despite the fact that hurricane season runs from June 1st to November 30th, that's a really long span of time because we're in it right now. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean you're having one like all the time. I think that's really important to understand the nature of hurricane season when we're talking about taking a cruise during this time of year.
I think that is very important, and it is very important to know that. And it's good to think that. I mean, it's good to know that like these ships can stand up to to good storm weather. Now, granted, I know we said the Titanic was unsinkable many years ago, and that was obviously proven wrong. I'm just kidding. But no, it's honestly, you are correct. The ships today are built very well if they ever had to go through any really strong storms. I've actually done some reading on that myself, and I know that they're built pretty well. So that should put everyone's mind at ease. Plus, and the last time we actually did see a hurricane every week was back in 2004, wherein it was just one right after the other. And by the time it got to number 4, it was just like, all right, this is getting ridiculous. So
yeah. It's kind of like what I was thinking about, Joe, is like, you and I live in Florida. There's folks that live in Texas and in Mississippi and all their Gulf Coast states. And it's not like we're dealing with hurricanes all the time. It's not like it's, they're just all over the place. They happen. They occur. Not every storm is a category 5. But when you're talking about taking a cruise during hurricane season, there's a risk involved. There's risks involved throughout the year. Like I said, it can rain during any time of the year. It can snow. There can be large waves. I mean, it's not to say that storms only and bad weather only occur during hurricane season. That's definitely incorrect. It can happen throughout the year. And also, I don't feel that it's as necessarily as large of a concern than maybe some first-time cruisers make it out to be. Again, it's not. I don't want to mitigate that what can happen, but just because it can happen doesn't mean it will happen. And I feel like a lot of first-time cruisers really get hung up on the idea of cruising during hurricane season. Now, I will say there is one thing that you should probably avoid a cruise during hurricane season for, and that is if you have your heart set on visiting a certain port, like you're like Matt, Joe, I want to visit. I really want to go to Cozumel. I really want to go to Grand Cayman. I really want to go to whatever port it is. And if I went anywhere else, it would be a major disappointment. # cruise ruined. Then maybe going during hurricane season may not be the time for you. Just eliminate as many possible issues that may come up, right? And make it as simple as possible. Now, again, you may still very well miss that one of those ports in the middle of December, but it's, it's something to consider at least. And, I think that for most people, if they went Eastern or they went Western, not a tremendous problem one way or the other. I think there's so many great ports all around the Caribbean that in many cases it's just okay. Well, we're not going to go there instead, but we got this to look forward to instead, so that works itself out.
Marvelous. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your advice on cruising during hurricane season. I honestly I think hurricane. Now I lived in Florida for so many years. I just think hurricane. It's just another little drizzly storm outside. So, well, that being said, I guess it's time for us to move on to our next segment, which is the photo of the week. So, our photo of the week comes from this week. It comes from Facebook group RC Periscopers. By the way, this group pulls together people willing to live stream and share their experiences on the ships through the Periscope app. And we've had a bunch of great photos submitted in this group, and we picked one from Nikki Vitani, pictured here eating at Johnny Rockets on board. And oh my gosh, that's not a normal size burger. That's a triple decker deluxe something or other. I don't know. Probably forget what they call them at Johnny Rockets. Look at the size of that. Oh my gosh, Matt. I don't think Matt. I don't think I could eat a burger that big. Could you eat a burger that big?
No, I've met Nick. He's not normal. I mean that in a good way. he goes out of his way to find these kinds of things. And yes, no, you have to basically have to unhinge your jaw and to eat that thing. And no, Joe, you're not. You and I, we're the normal people here. This is not meant for mere mortals to try to eat.
I've never been called normal in my life. Thank you. That was nice. That was the nicest compliment I've gotten all. Anyway, yeah, ever. Anyway, wow, that was. Thank you, Nick, so much for sending in that photo. Guys, if you want to show your support of CruiseWeek.tv, our merch store is now open. You can get cups, shirts, hats, much more. Just head over to cruiseweek.tv/merch to check out our offerings. By the way, next week, we're going to be taking a deep dive into something that many people don't think they're ever going to need: travel insurance. Do I need travel insurance is a question that comes up all the time and time again on the cruise boards that we monitor. So we decided to check it out a little further. So next week we're going to be having travel insurance agent Dan on from, I'm hoping I'm saying this right, Allianz. So have your questions ready for him next week. He'll be able to tell you anything that you need to know about travel insurance and if you should get it. So, if you like our shows, you may want to consider joining the Cruise Week Inner Circle. You can find out more by going to cruiseweek.tv/support, and with your support, it helps us bring great videos to you and guests each week, and helps us to raise money to bring on 5 more new cruisers on the trip of a lifetime. So be sure to head over to cruiseweek.tv/support to see all that there is to offer over there. By the way, I also want to thank Kathy from RC Periscopers Group for helping us out over in the Periscope chat room and for keeping order over there. If you want to see a lot of live streams from people on the ships, head over to the RC Periscopers Group on Facebook for a list. Also, don't forget, my co-host Matt Hochberg runs the amazingly popular Royal Caribbean blog at royalcaribbeanblog.com, where you can find out just about anything royal related. And he does a nightly live chat, so be sure to check that out. Matt and Shally are going to be back next week with more carnival information and helping you with your questions. So be sure to catch us next week. Plus, Matt goes live every Wednesday night right here for an informal Q&A where we can talk about anything and everything and all get to know each other just a little bit better. And if you know someone who's going to enjoy watching this show just as much as you do, be nice and share the link to their Facebook wall. That way they can enjoy the show as well. That being said, I think it's time for us to wrap up. We'll see you guys next week. And until then, stay fun, cruisers.